Choujin X is a modern masterpiece. A sprawling narrative with world-shaking stakes, philosophically charged storytelling, aesthetic brilliance, and emotional weight that few stories in manga have ever reached for me. One of the first words that come to mind when I think about this story might come as a surprise to other people who have read it. Choujin X is epic, and not in a way I've ever seen before. I wouldn't compare it to a traditional epic like Journey to the West, The Odyssey, or even One Piece if we're looking at the same medium of manga, but it feels like a story of equal gravity to those massive sprawling tales whilst being very grounded at the same time. Grand in scope, weird in all the right ways, unruly and imaginative, unbelievably ambitious, and above all, deeply personal. It's a story that invites you into its world slowly, feeling familiar and original at the same time, until eventually you are completely submerged in the story Sui Ishida has spent the bulk of this decade telling. And yet, for some reason, Choujin X still feels criminally under-discussed. There are barely any videos on YouTube, the online communities are pretty small, with discussions being very hard to come by, and the irregular release schedule has made it difficult for many people to keep up with. And that's a damn shame, because the arc that just finished in the most recent chapter is no joke one of the best arcs I have ever read across any story ever. And we're only roughly 70 chapters into this journey. If there were ever a good time to start reading this manga, this is it, right now. In fact, if you have any intention of reading this story, I do suggest you go and read it right now. Like the video of course, but click off to go and read it. Come back when you're done, because the best way to experience this story is with zero expectations. But if you need a little something to sell you, that will be the main purpose of today's video. Without spoiling anything too significant, I want to share why Choujin X has skyrocketed into my list of favorite stories, and why I think it's the single most underappreciated gem of modern manga. A one-of-a-kind experience that deserves way more attention than it's getting. I have been interested in Choujin X pretty much since it started. I only recently read Tokyo Ghoul, but the name Sui Ishida is known to most people who read manga, so when the first chapter of his new manga released, there was a lot of noise. But then it just went kinda quiet. For honestly a few years. Here and there I'd see pages on Twitter, and even without knowing a single thing about the story, the artwork alone put this manga on my radar. But the moment I knew I had to read it was when the chapters covering Batista and Zora's confrontation in the Tower of Mourning released. The way people were freaking out in the captions of the tweets compelled me to read the dialogue on the pages, and once I did, I was immediately sold. I couldn't ignore this story any longer. Still, before diving in, I decided to read Tokyo Ghoul first. Not because it was necessary, the two stories are completely independent and disconnected, so you don't need any knowledge of the former to appreciate the latter, but personally, I love seeing creators evolve. Watching their art improve, their style mature, their storytelling shift and come into its own. Ideally, I do recommend reading Tokyo Ghoul before Choujin X if you haven't. It's very fun to compare and contrast the two stories and witness this artist evolve in so many different ways, but don't feel like you need to. Getting through 30 volumes to start a manga that isn't even half that length could be a deterrent for some people, so don't let that happen and just read Choujin X first if you're more interested in the ongoing experience. You can always go back and check out Tokyo Ghoul in the future. To bring it back to my love of artistic evolution, essentially the joy in experiencing the process of an artist growing and changing through the art itself, you actually don't get much of that in Choujin X. That's one of the main things that sets it apart from Tokyo Ghoul. And of course you don't. Ishida is already a master by the time he starts this story. It is utterly refined right from the very beginning. Sure, there's some awkwardness early on, it can feel like a slow burn as the premise unfolds, but everything about that section of the story feels very deliberate and measured. The story truly begins in the title drop sequence of chapter 24, with everything before that serving as a long-winded prologue. A slow build-up culminating in an explosive climax with the Moon Beast arc. That's where the story truly begins, and it takes its sweet time leading up to that massive turning point. Because you see, this isn't a story that needs to find its footing. This isn't a story that obsesses over its voice being heard and feels the need to speak to as many people as possible. This is a seasoned veteran of the industry writing a passion project with zero assistance, zero editorial influence, and zero fucks given about what anybody else has to say. A 100% pure product. Ishida is in the lab like Walter White, doing something that you rarely ever see in this industry, creating a story purely by himself. And so Ishida isn't trying to win the audience. He's not trying to prove himself or have his story be accepted by the masses. He's free from those concerns that definitely existed when drawing Tokyo Ghoul. Now he's just telling the story he wants to tell, with full creative control, taking the time he needs to perfect every tiny detail. And it is so unabashed in everything it does, it has so much personality. That alone makes Choujin X feel special. Tokyo Ghoul is still my preferred work for now, but honestly it's only a matter of time before Choujin takes the crown. As I'll go on to explain, this is a story that is so made for me and my tastes. As a quick clarification for those who are new here, this is more of a review style video than the analysis I'm typically known for. I did the same for Tokyo Ghoul, but this video will be even less comprehensive and even more free-flowing than that, which was already very different to the kinds of videos I usually make. And the main reason for this is simply because Choujin X is not only incomplete, but only roughly 70 monthly sized chapters long at the time of making this video, which is about equivalent to part 1 of Tokyo Ghoul with its 140-ish weekly sized chapters. I expect Choujin X to continue for at least 50 more of these monthly sized chapters, so I'd wager that we're roughly around the halfway point of the story. I'm making this video to serve as a simple introduction to the story on the channel. I just want to talk about the series generally before those ultra specific deep dives come around, one of which is already completely written and just waiting for me to record and edit, so you can expect that sometime this month. So without further ado, let's talk about why this series hit so hard for me by looking at some of the general strengths of Choujin X. This story can flip from a surreal, Looney Tunes style scene to an intense psychological breakdown without missing a beat. And it works, it never feels out of place. One moment you're laughing at a talking vulture, the next you're watching a child confront the trauma of identity, morality, and existential dread. There's a tonal fluidity and mastery all throughout the manga that pairs so well with the visual presentation to make for a consistently engaging experience. It's fun to read, effortless really. I found myself sucked into the experience for practically the entire duration of my read-through. There's a bit of that tonal mastery in Tokyo Ghoul as well, especially in the latter half of the story, but it's taken even further with Choujin X, which, while still being a very dark narrative overall, can definitely be much brighter than its predecessor and thus juggles around so many more vibes and tones than Tokyo Ghoul. Something else I adore is the minimalistic brilliance of the presentation. The quotes at the start of some chapters setting the vibe for what you're about to read. Some scenes that last only a few pages and yet carry as much weight as an entire chapter should. Ishida knows exactly what to show, how much to show, what to hold back and when to let loose. He trusts the reader and in turn the reader stays locked in. You never fall into the territory of dull, inconsequential exposition dumps. There's no heavy narration that lasts for pages on end and can feel tiresome to get through. And what makes this especially impressive is the sheer density of what Ishida has created here, and how difficult it is to craft a world so detailed and refined and layered without falling back on exposition dumps. The lore of the world, the rules, the power system, the social dynamics, the politics, everything unravels naturally as you move through the story. The end of chapter sketches definitely help here and obviously do kind of function as exposition dumps, but crucially, they're not in the actual story itself, which supports the key point I'm making. Ishida never interrupts the flow of the read, and yet he somehow managed to make this one of the densest stories I've ever read of its length. It is incredibly difficult to pull off both of those things at the same time, crafting something so ambitious in concept and humongous in scope, while never sacrificing on immersion and ensuring the story remains engaging to experience throughout. Visually, this is undeniably Ishida's best work. As I briefly mentioned earlier, simply the artwork was enough to put this story very high on my radar. Choujin X could exist and thrive purely off of its aesthetic alone. Some of the spreads are museum-worthy art pieces, the kind you just stare at for minutes, soaking in the detail. An issue many people find with Tokyo Ghoul, that being the action paneling and specifically the fight choreography, is pretty much non-existent in Choujin X. Battles are always seamless and easily digestible. Ishida's art has just evolved in so many ways while still retaining a lot of similarities to his Tokyo Ghoul days. Everything I said about the artwork in my Tokyo Ghoul review still holds up. The calculated chaos of the aesthetic, the range in illustrations, the wide number of brushes and pens used to maximum efficiency, the appropriateness of every individual page, and the specific drawing style used to present that specific scene, all of that is true in Choujin X, and it is even better. Definitely in large part due to the different release schedule, which gives Ishida much more time to think about how everything can be presented in the best way possible. The art is sharper, more stylized, and generally, it just feels more deliberate and meaningful in Choujin X. Something else that's very similar to Tokyo Ghoul but feels even more amplified is the structural precision of Choujin X. This is a mosaic-style narrative that rewards attention. Or to use the famous analogy George Martin described, Ishida is absolutely more of an architect than a gardener, essentially meaning everything in this story feels incredibly particular and purposeful. There's a blueprint here, a structure, the pacing, the foreshadowing, the callbacks, the long-term plot threads, the mysteries and payoffs. It's all very deliberate in a way that rewards attention and encourages rereading. It's such a fun story to theorize about. So much of the fandom discussion consists almost entirely of people obsessing over the tiniest details, and that's one of the main things that compels me to make content about the series. If you've seen any of my videos before, you know I go crazy over the smallest things, and there's infinite potential for that sort of rabbit hole deep diving with Choujin X. Lastly, and perhaps the single best quality of this story that really speaks to me, is how Ishida's creative control manifests in the narrative itself. I called Choujin X an epic towards the start of the video. It definitely feels like one to me. It also feels like a deeply psychological character drama in a similar vein to Tokyo Ghoul. It also feels like a battle shonen in a similar vein to Hunter x Hunter. It also feels like a play on the classic Chosen One story. It feels like so many things. The most challenging part of making this otherwise very simple review is the fact that Choujin X is almost impossible to place into a strict genre. I can explain One Piece or Bleach or Berserk or even Vagabond fairly easily. Obviously, there's only so much I can say in a few sentences, but I can sell the premise of those stories without having to say too much. Choujin X though, where to begin? What do you even say? It's very difficult to fit into a genre mold and outline a clear premise for this story that seems to be capable of anything. Each arc in Choujin X feels distinct while always feeling like Choujin X. Ishida uses the story like a sandbox, a playground of complete creative freedom for him to exercise his whims. Moonbeast feels like gothic horror. Tower of Morning goes from a classic battle shonen training arc to a rescue/mini war arc. Opium is more of an investigative thriller in the criminal underworld. Zora's Extermination is an all-out war with surrealist dream sequences sprinkled throughout. The story just goes wherever Ishida wants it to, and that's the single greatest selling point of Choujin X to me. Something I really didn't expect is that Choujin X is unapologetically battle shonen in its bones, and I love it. If you know anything about me, you know I'm a battle shonen guy, always have been, always will be. I love the aesthetic, I love the vibe, I love the hype. Since Tokyo Ghoul was my only exposure to Ishida's work prior to reading Choujin X, the last thing I was expecting from this manga was that battle shonen DNA. But it's really everywhere, and it makes sense when you see the kind of stories Ishida grew up reading and cites as some of his biggest inspirations, like Hunter x Hunter for example. Obviously, Choujin X is published in a seinen magazine, but I'll direct you to a video I made a few months ago to better understand what I mean by shonen DNA. This is a story with a tightly defined and intricate power system, a classic protagonist versus deuteragonist dynamic with rivalry, brotherhood and all, constantly escalating stakes and villains, emotional bonds and relationships between the cast that carry the same vibe as that classic shonen nakama camaraderie, the tonal range I described earlier with the story going from comedy to horror to tragedy all in the span of a single chapter, and most of all, a plot driven by fights that really mean something. The action isn't just action for action's sake, it's the vehicle for the story to progress, for characters to grow. The power system externalizes the characters' internal identities, the battles reflect deeper conflicts. Virtually the only reason Choujin X isn't considered a battle shonen is because it isn't published in a shonen magazine. Let's talk about the introduction of this story and our main character. Tokyo Kurohara is a nobody, a timid, directionless teenager who drifts through life stuck inside his own head and the shadow of his best friend Azuma. We witness this nobody, who clearly wants nothing more than to feel a sense of purpose when he wakes up in the morning, undergo a dramatic, life-altering transformation. He becomes a Choujin alongside his best friend. Now, here's what makes that moment so important and series defining. Here's why Ishida chose to go about the first chapter of this story the way he did. There is a very important point made in chapter 1 that establishes the story of Choujin X as a beast of its own. When an author is known for a work as iconic as Tokyo Ghoul, it can be difficult to make something new without constant comparisons to their supposed magnum opus. A case of this that went very poorly is Masashi Kishimoto's creation of Samurai 8, the follow-up to the worldwide phenomenon we all know and love, Naruto. Samurai 8 was eventually axed and left by the wayside. An example of this that had a healthier trajectory can be found with Togashi and Hunter x Hunter, which definitely suffered from constant comparisons to Yu Yu Hakusho before that story eventually managed to stand toe-to-toe and arguably even surpass its predecessor in the eyes and minds of the majority. Choujin X is hopefully on a similar trajectory. Maybe it won't surpass Tokyo Ghoul, but it has already made great strides in developing its own reputation completely exclusive of the massive legacy Tokyo Ghoul first eclipsed it with. In a way, the relationship between these stories is kinda reflected in the dynamic between Tokyo and Azuma. The timid, directionless protagonist of Choujin X lives in the shadow of his best friend, but with time he has come into his own and slowly but surely broken free of his inferiority complex, cementing himself as a person worthy of individual praise and respect, sorta like the manga he leads and its relationship with its predecessor. Anyways, short tangent aside, let's go back to the very important point Ishida made in chapter 1. Something I'm sure everybody was saying when Choujin X first began is that this is a very similar start to Tokyo Ghoul on the surface. We have a timid protagonist who undergoes a life-changing transformation and becomes the supernatural being the story is named after. Kaneki became a ghoul, Tokyo became a Choujin. But there's a very crucial difference between the two chapters that echo throughout both stories, that make up the thematic backbone of each story. Kaneki was forced to become a ghoul. It was something completely outside of his control. He had zero choice in the matter. He simply went on a date with a girl who had manipulated him and was planning to eat him, got bitten, and then woke up in a hospital with a brand new physiology. And that established the fundamental tragedy of the character, his own lack of agency, the way he is thrust into the world of the supernatural against his own will. By very stark contrast, Tokyo and Azuma both choose to inject themselves with Zemba, the Choujin serum. They make an autonomous decision to enter this supernatural world. There's definitely an element of fate at play as they were presented with the choice, having been placed in such a precarious situation, but fate did not force their hand. They could have tried their luck in escaping from Johnny, but they chose to fight back, and that is what begins the story of Choujin X. Tokyo Ghoul is a tragedy in almost every sense, a story of immense suffering that culminates in the affirmation of one's own agency despite the workings of fate. A story that ultimately tells you to keep moving forward, that fighting back against the cruelty of the world is the one choice you have to make for life to be worth living, after hundreds of chapters where it felt like all the choices were being made for Kaneki. Choujin X instead explores the weight and consequences of your choices, giving its characters a great deal of agency right from the very beginning, despite still having that fatalistic element in the backdrop, with the manipulation of higher entities driving the plot forward. In some ways, it almost feels like a thematic continuation of Tokyo Ghoul, exploring the questions that were presented by that story's ending and going even deeper in its dissection of fate and agency. One of this story's greatest strengths is the character writing. Each member of this ensemble feels like a fully formed concept with thematic weight behind them, playing a distinct role in the larger framework of the cast. At the center, we have the main character I just briefly discussed, Tokyo Kurohara. He begins the story passive, overshadowed by his best friend and unsure of his place in the world. But through the power of choice, through the act of becoming a Choujin and diving into this world of the supernatural, he steps into a reality that demands change, maturity, and demands him to make use of the agency he always had. This arc is one of slow-burning transformation, as Tokyo learns to define himself rather than being defined by others. One thing I really love about Tokyo's progression is that it can sometimes be hard to pinpoint distinct moments that transformed him. There are obviously some key climaxes in the story so far that deeply impacted Tokyo, but overall, his journey is handled with so much grace and carefulness that you almost don't realize how much he's changed until you take a step back and really think about it. Like, damn, the guy we have in the latest chapter and the dude we met in chapter 1 couldn't be more different. Besides, or perhaps opposite Tokyo, stands Azuma. his charismatic, idealistic best friend. Azuma starts out as the golden boy, pretty much the perfect human being in the eyes of most people around him. Strong, brave, admirable, but as the story progresses, his ideals slowly begin to warp. His mind frame begins to deteriorate, and his fate finds itself in the clutches of higher powers that have plans for him. Where Tokyo's arc is about stepping into agency, Azuma's is about losing it. The relationship between these two isn't just the emotional backbone of the narrative, it is a mirror of the story's thematic exploration. Then there is the main heroine, Ellie, making up the third member of our main trio, which also adds to the aforementioned battle shonen vibes of this story. Ellie is one of the earliest and most consistent emotional anchors of this story. The premise of the character alone is enough to make you want to root for her. The daughter of a notorious thief who is determined to not become like her mother to escape the weight of that legacy, yet having been so deeply impacted by that influence, it is reflected in the Choujin powers she manifested. Being raised by farmer parents in the Gaga prefecture gives us an interesting POV into the city life of Yamato, and also makes Ellie really stand out among the cast with her more colourful and inquisitive personality in contrast to most of her peers. Each of the main three are incredibly dynamic characters who have changed drastically since the start of the story, with their ideals constantly being challenged and often conflicting with each other. Surrounding the main trio is an incredibly rich cast, with each embodying a different slice of this bizarre and brutal world. There are the legacy characters from the previous generations, the X's of old, like Sora Siroha, Queen McMahon, and Bill Morth, the Deathless Emperor. Each of these characters inform the events of the present, their influence spanning across time and space as they each make up large chunks of the story's lore, their impact manifesting in several fascinating ways. Sora Siroha, being the only living X of old at the start of the story, is the primary example of this. The Choujin X's presence hangs over the story like a metaphysical shadow. There's something celestial or divine about her. As one who sees the future in the form of prophecy, she feels like a stand-in for fate itself. She speaks in riddles, appears at pivotal moments, and seems connected to the higher order of the world. I haven't even mentioned my single favorite character in the cast, Batista Hoshi, whose story is among the most emotionally impactful things I have ever experienced. There's Sandek, the weathered peacekeeper of Yamato Mori, the archetypal strongest on the side of the protagonists, like the Satoru Gojo of Choujin X. There's the morally dubious Sato, a mentor to the protagonist whose presentation always seems to put everybody on edge, leading to thousands of theories regarding his true allegiances. Every character in Choujin X has something unique to offer. The comedic bizarreness of Nude, the sheer aura of Beidou Vlad, the functional genius behind Ririka Umezawa, the bumpy journey of Chandra Hume, the uncomfortable nature of the Nue Chimera's existence, the tragedy and mission of Simon Kagomura, the whimsy and insanity of Yubiko, etc, etc. What makes the cast so powerful is that none of these characters exist just to move the plot forward. They all feel like the center of their own story. Every single one of them is shaped by the world they live in, and every one of them helps reshape the world in turn. They feel synthesized, as any good cast should. They're always impacting each other directly and, most importantly, indirectly, all throughout the story. There's so much more to say about the cast, the world building, the thematic genius of the storytelling. But this is just a simple review, and those things will all be covered on this very channel in the near future. If you love manga that is brimming with substance, containing a world and history so unbelievably rich it challenges stories several times its length, looks and feels incredible with its own unique aesthetic language, doesn't hold your hand and challenges you to pay attention to the most minute details, and is created by a modern legend working at their absolute peak, then you need to read Choujin X, and there is literally no better time than now, given the brief hiatus Ishida is currently taking in preparation for the next arc. Being here as the story is unfolding is a rare kind of experience. I've only been caught up for a few chapters, but I am so glad I got to experience the conclusion to one of my all-time favorite manga arcs in real time. Once this story takes off, which I'm sure it will provided it's picked up for a good anime adaptation, trust me when I say that you'll want to be one of the people who are here early. For those who have read Choujin X, let me know what your thoughts are on this story. Does it compare with Tokyo Ghoul? Who are your favorite characters? What's your favorite moment? And I hope that those who are caught up to the story are looking forward to my future content on the series, which will be coming very soon. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.